The human in the royal court. The great court of Selkara was filled with glowing light and alien music. Tall pillars of crystal surrounded the hall. Alien nobles from many worlds sat in golden seats, waiting for something or someone. A loud horn echoed through the room. Then the voice of the royal announcer boomed. Presenting the human from Earth. His name is Terran. The crowd went silent. Terran walked in slowly. He looked small compared to the tall, elegant aliens. He wore a plain black suit. His brown hair was short, and his eyes were calm. But many aliens whispered and laughed. Why did the king invite a human here? Look at him. So weak. Is this a joke? On the left side of the throne sat the 3 alien princesses, sisters of royal blood. The first, Velari, had shining silver skin and golden eyes. She whispered something and laughed loudly. The second, Nisha, had blue scales and a long tail. She looked Terran up and down, then rolled her eyes. The third, Taraka, had dark green hair like vines and sharp teeth. She made a sound like a growl and said, "This human looks like a child." Terran heard them. He said nothing. He didn't even look angry. He just smiled, slowly, as he walked toward the throne. The king of Selkara, a powerful figure in red armor, sat on the highest seat. His eyes were old but sharp. Terran of Earth, the king said in a deep voice, "Do you know why I called you here?" Terran nodded once. "Yes, Your Highness, I brought something for you." He pulled out a small device from his coat. It looked simple, just a smooth silver cube with a soft blue glow. "What is this?" the king asked. Terran stepped forward. "Your body is dying. Your own healers cannot stop it. This device will save your life." The court laughed again. Velari stood and shouted, "What lie is this? Human tricks." But the king raised his hand. Silence. He took the cube. As soon as his fingers touched it, the cube began to glow brighter. Lines of light moved up his arm. His skin, which had been dull and cracked, started to shine with health. The court gasped. One healer ran to check the king's heartbeat. "It's true," the healer cried. "The decay is gone." The king smiled for the first time in years. "You have given me back my strength." Now, the mood in the court changed. The aliens who had laughed were now quiet. Some even looked nervous. Terran stood still. He wasn't proud. He wasn't scared. He was calm, like he expected this. The king stood and raised his hand. "This human has done what none of us could. He saved his enemy without asking for anything in return." He turned to the 3 princesses. "You mocked him. All of you did." Valeri's face turned red with shame. Nisha looked away. Tarika's mouth opened, but she said nothing. The king smiled. "So now, I give you all a chance to learn." He pointed at the sisters. "You will each serve this human for 7 days. You will eat with him, walk with him, and listen to him. You will learn his mind." "What?" Valeri shouted. "Father, this is..." Silence. The king roared. "You may be royal, but today you learn respect." Terran finally spoke. "I didn't come for power. I only wanted peace." The king looked at him. "Then show us what peace looks like, human." The guards came forward to escort the sisters toward Terran. They looked angry, but they followed the king's order. As the court emptied, Terran looked up at the throne one more time. The king whispered to his closest advisor, "This human, he's not what he seems." Far above the court, hidden behind golden curtains, a secret camera recorded everything. Somewhere far away, someone was watching. A dark figure smiled and said, "It has begun." What did he give the king? The court was still buzzing with whispers long after the human, Terran, had left the throne room. Every noble, guard, and servant had only one question on their lips. What was that thing he gave to the king? In the royal healing chamber, the cube floated in the air, pulsing with blue light. 3 royal scientists, a healer, and 2 war scholars stood in silence, watching it. The king sat calmly in his golden chair, breathing deeper than he had in years. "It's not from any known technology," whispered the head scientist. "No signal, no power source, but it cured the royal decay within minutes." "Is it magic?" someone asked. The king shook his head. "It's something beyond both science and magic. It's human." Meanwhile, in the royal guest quarters, Terran stood near a large window, staring at the stars. The 3 alien sisters were standing a few feet behind him. They had just arrived, all 3 looking furious. Valerie crossed her arms and spoke first. "Let's make something clear. We are not your servants." Nisha hissed, "This is just a royal joke. 7 days with a human. I'd rather be exiled." Taraka narrowed her glowing eyes. "We don't fear you." Terran turned around, calm as ever. "That's good," he said with a slight smile. "Because I don't want fear. I want your attention." The sisters were surprised. They had expected him to be proud, arrogant, or scared. But he was none of that. He simply sat down and poured himself a glass of silver tea from the tray. He sipped it slowly, then looked at them. "I know you hate me, but for the next 7 days, you'll see something you've never seen before." "Like what?" Nisha asked, clearly annoyed. "A human mind," Terran said simply. Later that night, strange things began happening in the palace. One of the healer bots short-circuited. Then a food delivery drone crashed near the garden. One of the princess's bodyguards reported that a black mist had appeared near the royal library, then vanished. "Sabotage," whispered the guards. But by who? The king called an emergency meeting, but Terran wasn't invited. Back in the guest room, the sisters sat watching Terran from a distance. He was reading an alien book, something no human had ever done. His fingers moved across glowing symbols like he had studied them for years. Valerie couldn't help but ask, "How do you understand our language so well?" Terran didn't look up. "I've been studying Selkaran dialects for 7 years. Earth has more data than you think." Taraka muttered, "Still doesn't explain how you healed our father." Terran finally looked up. "That device, it's not a weapon. It's a key." "A key to what?" Nisha asked. "To peace." On day 2, something even more shocking happened. The royal guard stormed into the guest wing. "Human, you must come with us." "Now." Terran stood up calmly. The sisters followed. In the throne room, the scientists had discovered something terrifying. The cube was evolving. "It's growing, changing form," said the head scientist. "Now it's showing visions, memories, places not even on our star maps." Terran nodded. "It's showing you Earth's future, and your own." Everyone gasped. "What do you mean our own?" the king asked. Terran stepped forward. "In 20 years, Selkara will be invaded. A black swarm. You won't survive alone." "You're lying," one noble shouted. "No," Terran replied. "The cube is from that future. It carries the data of Earth's war. And our victory." "Why would Earth help us?" the king asked. Terran looked at the sisters. "Because not all enemies need to stay enemies." That night, the sisters couldn't sleep. Each of them lay in their royal beds, thinking about what they had seen. Valerie remembered how their people once called humans dust walkers. But now, this human held the future in his hands. Nisha watched the cube from her hidden monitor. If it shows the truth, what else does he know? Taraka sat alone on the rooftop, staring at the stars. For the first time, she whispered, "Maybe we were wrong about him." On day 3, the king made a new decree. Terran would be given full guest authority. Any noble who insulted him would answer to the crown. This shocked the court. The sisters were even more surprised when they learned their next task: help Terran deliver a royal speech at the Grand Unity Festival. "What?" Valerie shouted. "You want us to stand beside him?" "Yes," said the king. "And smile. As the sisters walked with Terran to the festival grounds, they noticed something strange. Aliens from all castes bowed to Terran. The merchant guild offered him gifts. Children ran after him with flowers. Even the palace guards saluted him. He had done nothing, yet everyone respected him. How? Nisha whispered. Terran answered without turning. Respect is not taken. It is returned. On the stage, as the festival began, Terran stepped forward to speak. He looked out at thousands of aliens. In my world, he said, I was called many things. Weak, slow, useless. But today, I'm here because one king chose to believe in something rare. Hope. He looked at the king, then at the sisters. I didn't come to rule you. I came to learn from you. And maybe you can learn something from me. The crowd cheered. The sisters stood silently. For the first time in their lives, they were unsure and curious. And curiosity is where change begins. The week of servitude. The morning sun of Selkara cast golden rays over the palace. It was the beginning of the week of servitude, a royal order that forced the 3 princesses to serve the human, Terran, for 7 full days. None of them were happy. Inside Terran's private guest chambers, the room was quiet. The furniture was simple, the bed made perfectly. On the balcony, Terran stood sipping hot Chiral tea, watching the glowing sky. A knock came at the door. He turned. Valerie entered first, her silver robes trailing behind her. She walked as if she was still in control, even though the law now said otherwise. Behind her came Nisha, clearly annoyed. Her tail whipped left and right in frustration. Last came Taraka. She didn't say a word but kept her sharp eyes on Terran. Day 1, Valerie said coldly. What do you want us to do? Terran placed the tea down. Follow me. They walked through the gardens, where alien flowers sang, and the trees moved gently with the wind. Your duty today, Terran said, is to walk beside me. That's all. That's it, Nisha said, confused. Seems too easy, Valerie added suspiciously. Terran smiled. It's not about doing hard things. It's about being present. For an hour, they walked in silence. Terran didn't speak unless spoken to. The sisters exchanged glances. This was strange. He wasn't taking advantage of them. He wasn't ordering them around. He wasn't proud. He was just kind. Later, in the garden square, they saw a young alien boy crying. His pet, a floating jelly-like creature, was stuck in a tall tree. Guards walked past, ignoring it. Terran stopped. Wait here. He climbed the tree with ease and rescued the creature. The boy looked up in awe. You're the human, he said. Thank you. The boy's mother bowed low. We were taught humans were dangerous, but you are different. The sisters saw it and felt it. That night, the sisters sat together in their private room. I don't understand him, Valerie said. He acts like we are equals. He doesn't even raise his voice, Nisha replied. It's annoying. Taraka didn't speak. She just kept staring at the stars. Day 2. Terran invited them to a public market in the lower levels of the city. Why are we here? Taraka asked. To eat street food, Terran said. Valerie looked disgusted. With commoners? Yes, Terran said, because food tastes better when shared. They walked through the market, and everyone stared. No one had seen the royal sisters walk here in generations. Whispers followed them. Terran spoke to vendors in their own language. He tried fried shiverleaf, glowing roots, and even drank sour nectar juice. The sisters slowly joined in. Taraka tried a snack first, pretending she didn't like it, but then finished the whole bowl. A merchant gave Terran a free pouch of crystals. For the Lightbringer, he said. Terran shared it with the sisters without a word. Back in the palace, that night, Valerie tried to poison him. She had hidden a slow toxin in his tea. A drop, almost undetectable. But Terran didn't drink it. He smiled instead and said, "Don't worry. I'm used to being tested." Villari froze. "You knew," she whispered. Terran looked into her golden eyes. "I don't fear poison. I fear hatred." And he walked away. For the first time, Villari felt shame, not because she failed, but because he didn't fight back. Day 3. The royal library was silent. Scrolls of ancient wars, medicine, and lost stars filled the walls. Terran sat with books open, reading faster than any Selkaran. Nisha walked in. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Studying your people, understanding what you value." "Why?" she asked again. "Because I want to build peace, not just enjoy praise," Terran answered. Nisha sat across from him. She watched him read in silence. Without realizing it, she began helping. She translated a difficult passage, then another. Hours passed. She forgot he was human. Day 4. Taraka challenged Terran to a duel. "I need to know what you're hiding," she said. They stepped into the training ring. Terran didn't want to fight, but he accepted. He dodged quickly, never hitting her back. She attacked again and again. Claws, speed, roars. Finally, she slipped and almost fell off the ring's edge. Terran caught her. She looked at him, close. His hand was bleeding. He didn't let go. "You didn't hit me," she whispered. "I never wanted to," Terran replied. For the first time, Tareka smiled. Day 5. The sisters were now acting differently. Villari brought Terran breakfast without being asked. Nisha sat with him during evening tea. Tareka followed him to the balcony each night to watch the stars. The people of the palace began noticing. The princesses were changing. Day 6. Disaster struck. A saboteur entered the palace disguised as a servant. He was from an enemy species, sent to kill the king. He planted an explosive device near the throne room. Only one person noticed. Terran. He ran into danger, alone. He disarmed the bomb with seconds to spare, but it exploded partially, throwing him against a wall. Guards arrived too late. Terran lay bleeding, unconscious. The sisters came running. Taraka dropped to her knees. "Please, don't die." Nisha shouted at the medics. "Fix him. Now." Villari held his hand. "You fool. Why did you risk yourself?" His voice was weak. "Because that's what peace demands." Day 7. Terran woke up in a healing pod. The 3 sisters sat nearby. No longer proud, no longer cruel. Villari whispered, "You could have let someone else die, but you didn't." Nisha said, "I thought humans were weak. I was wrong." Taraka smiled softly. "I mocked you, but now I admire you." Terran looked at them. "I don't need your service anymore." "But we want to stay," Villari said. The king entered the room. He smiled. "Then prepare yourselves, because what comes next will change your fate forever." The royal command. The golden throne room of Selkira had never felt this heavy with silence. Terran stood beside the 3 royal sisters, Villari, Nisha, and Taraka. His wounds were healing, but his spirit was strong. The people of the palace now looked at him with quiet respect. Guards lined the walls. Nobles stood in small groups, whispering nervously. And at the top of the long stairs, the king of Selkira sat on his throne with his crystal staff in hand. His eyes, sharp as blades, moved from Terran to his daughters. "Bring them forward," he said. Villari, Nisha, and Taraka walked up the steps and stood before their father. They looked calm on the outside, but inside, everything was a storm. The king's voice echoed across the chamber. "For 7 days, you served the human from Earth, a being you once mocked, a soul you once insulted." The sisters said nothing. "He saved my life," the king continued. "He warned us of the coming war. He healed my body and risked his own to protect this kingdom." He looked at them slowly. "And you, my daughters, have changed." Taraka bowed her head. Nisha blinked fast, as if holding back emotion. Velari clenched her fists. The king stood up. Then it is time. I give my final command. The entire court froze. I, King Arzith of Sulkara, order you, Velari, Nisha, and Taraka, to become brides to the human, Terran of Earth. Gasps filled the air. A noble dropped his golden goblet. One guard whispered, "Did he just say, marry?" Terran blinked. "Your Majesty, that's not necessary." The king raised a hand. "Silence, Terran. This is not a punishment. It is a bond of honor." Velari stepped forward. "Father, this is madness. We are princesses." "Yes," the king said. "And that is why you must set an example. You mocked him. You laughed at his species. Now you must stand beside him." Nisha spoke next. "You want to use us like peace tools." "No," the king said firmly. "I want you to learn what true unity means." Taraka looked at Terran. Her voice was low. "What do you want?" All eyes turned to Terran. He looked at each sister carefully. "None of you owe me anything," he said. "I didn't come here for revenge or marriage." He looked at the king. "If this is forced, I reject it." The crowd gasped again. Terran turned back to the sisters. "I'll only marry them if they choose it, with their hearts, not because a king commands it." The king smiled. "Then I am more proud of you than ever." He turned to his daughters. "You may choose your path. You are free. But remember, this human saved your world. He gave us time, gave us hope." He sat back on the throne. And hope must never be wasted. After the meeting, the sisters sat together in the royal garden. The sun was setting, and golden light danced across the crystal trees. They said nothing for a long time. Then Velari broke the silence. "I hated him." Nisha nodded. "So did I." Taraka stared at the stars. "But he never hated us back." Velari whispered, "He could have humiliated us." "He didn't." Nisha leaned back. "I tried to hurt him. He still shared food with me." Taraka smiled faintly. "And I tried to break him with a fight. But he caught me instead." Later that night, a servant told Terran the sisters were waiting for him at the Moon Bridge, a sacred, quiet place near the edge of the palace. Terran went alone. He found them standing there, looking at the sky. The moon of Selkara shone bright over the silver water below. Taraka was first to speak. "We need to talk." Terran waited. Nisha said, "When you first came here, I thought you were beneath us." Velari added, "I thought you were weak." Taraka said softly, "But now, we know the truth." They stepped forward together. Velari placed her hand over her heart. "I mocked you." Nisha said, "I judged you." Taraka said, "But I felt something I've never felt before." They all said together, "Respect." Terran looked at them. "So, what now?" Velari smiled. "We don't obey our father. We don't obey tradition." Nisha added, "But we follow our hearts." Taraka stepped closer and looked into Terran's eyes. "We want to choose you, not because of duty, but because you're different." Velari took his hand. "You make us better." Nisha nodded. "You showed us who we could be." Taraka leaned her head on his shoulder. "And who we want to be." Terran closed his eyes for a moment. "I didn't come here looking for love," he said. "But maybe love found me." The stars above seemed to shine brighter. From a hidden tower, the king watched the scene through his crystal lens. He turned to his advisor. "Mark this day," he said, "for the war will come, but now we have a human." Far across the galaxy, deep in a black nebula, a massive alien fleet stirred. Shadowy figures moved like smoke. Their leader sat on a throne of bones and metal. A screen flickered. "Terran of Earth has united with Sulkara's royalty," the creature hissed. "Then we moved sooner than planned." Red lights blinked. Ships powered up. The war Terran warned of was already on its way. Hearts begin to change. The next morning, Selkira woke to gentle light and calm winds. But inside the palace, change had already begun. Terran, the human once mocked by the entire court, now walked beside the three royal sisters, not as a servant, not as a stranger, but as someone they had begun to respect. And maybe something more. Vilari, once cold and proud, now spoke to him kindly. Nisha, once cruel and mocking, now asked him questions about Earth. Tiraka, once sharp and angry, now smiled quietly whenever he entered her room. They still didn't call it love, but hearts were softening. Walls were breaking. On the fourth day after the king's command, Terran took the sisters into the forest beyond the palace. "What is this place?" Nisha asked, looking around. "It's called the Mirror Glade," Terran replied. "The trees reflect your emotions." The sisters looked around. The silver trees stood tall, but inside their glass-like bark, colors shimmered. The trees reacted to whoever came near, bright for joy, dark for anger, soft blue for peace. Vilari touched one, and it glowed warm orange. Terran nodded. "You're still proud, but you're no longer angry." She smiled. "Maybe you're not so foolish after all." Nisha stood near a tree and asked, "Do you ever miss Earth?" "Every day," Terran answered. "But I left it to protect something greater." "Us," she said, surprised. "The galaxy," he said. "Selkira is important. More than you realize." Tiraka leaned against a stone. "Because of the invasion." Terran nodded. "I've seen the first wave. On another world. They come fast, like shadows. They eat stars." The sisters looked at each other. No one laughed. No one mocked. Because they now believed him. That evening, the royal dinner was private. Only the king, his daughters, and Terran sat at the table. The meal was silent, but not uncomfortable. Until the king asked, "Do you dream, Terran?" Terran placed his glass down. "Sometimes." "What about?" Terran looked at the sisters. "A future where I don't have to fight anymore, where people talk first and shoot later." The king nodded slowly. "And if war comes?" Terran's voice was firm. "Then I will protect what I love." The sisters looked at him. None spoke, but inside their hearts, something fluttered. Because for the first time, someone wanted to protect them, not just their throne. Later that night, a storm hit Selkira. Dark clouds rolled over the skies. The palace shook with thunder. And in the rain, Terran vanished. Vilari was the first to notice. Terran hasn't returned from the library. "Maybe he's reading again," Nisha said, trying to stay calm. "No," Tiraka said. "He always tells us where he goes." The sisters ran to the library. Empty. Then to the garden. Nothing. They checked every corner of the palace, but no sign of the human. Finally, a guard ran in, soaked in rain. "There's movement outside the barrier gate." Without waiting, the sisters raced toward the edge of the palace grounds. What they saw stole their breath. In the storm, Terran stood between a group of alien beasts and a frightened child. The creatures were long, with claws like blades and eyes like fire. The child screamed as one creature lunged. Terran grabbed a burning branch and swung it hard, forcing the beast back. His arm was bleeding, but he didn't move. The sisters acted fast. Vilari threw a flash crystal that blinded one beast. Nisha leaped and used her tail to trip another. Tiraka roared and tackled the last one with her sharp claws. Together, they pushed the creatures back into the forest. The child ran to safety. Rain poured, lightning flashed, and Terran collapsed. Back in the healing wing, the sisters waited outside the chamber. Vilari paced. Why didn't he call for help? Nisha sat quietly, because he knew no one else would go. Tiraka clenched her jaw. He didn't think of himself. He never does. The healer bot finally came out. "He will live," it said, "but he needs rest." The three sisters walked into the room. Terran lay in a soft bed, bandaged and breathing slowly. Valeri took his hand. "You foolish human," Nisha whispered. "You didn't have to do that." Taraka leaned down and said softly, "But we're glad you did." He opened his eyes slowly. "You're here?" he asked. "Where else would we be?" Valeri smiled. "You could have left," he said. Taraka sat beside him. "We don't want to." There was silence. Then Nisha said, "We've made our choice." Terran blinked. "What choice?" "You," Valeri whispered. "We choose you," Nisha added. Taraka smiled, tears in her glowing eyes. "If you'll have us." Terran looked at them, all three. His voice was weak but warm. "I already do." That night, under the stars, a quiet bond formed between the sisters and the human. Not because of tradition, not because of a king's command, but because they had seen each other's pain. And now, their hearts began to heal. But far away, beyond Selkira's sky, the enemy had already arrived. A shadow ship entered the outer rim of the star system. Its captain, a creature made of smoke and bone, watched Selkira through red lenses. "Soon," it hissed, "the Lightbringer will burn. Alien love and alien tears." For the next few days, the palace of Selkira felt strangely peaceful. Terran's wounds were healing, and the royal sisters, Valeri, Nisha, and Taraka, never left his side. They no longer treated him like an outsider, or even as a guest. Now they looked at him as someone who truly belonged. Every day, the sisters took turns caring for him. Valeri read him ancient poetry, something she never shared with anyone. Nisha brought him strange fruit from distant markets and fed it to him with a teasing smile. Taraka sat by his side in silence, holding his hand as he slept, her fierce spirit now calm. Something deeper had grown between them. It was no longer respect. It was love. One afternoon, the king entered Terran's chamber alone. "You've become the heart of my daughters," the king said quietly. Terran sat up slowly, wincing from the healing wounds. "That wasn't my plan, Your Majesty." "I know," the king replied, "and that's why it happened." He looked out the window. "Years ago, I sent warriors across the stars to find allies. None returned. All failed." He turned toward Terran. "But you, a single human, succeeded where armies did not." The king placed a small cube on Terran's bedside. "This is the Selkiran Oath Crystal. Only the chosen may touch it without harm." Terran stared at it. "If my daughters truly accept you," the king said, "then so must Selkira. And so must you." "What happens if I touch it?" Terran asked. The king smiled. "You'll be one of us." That night, under a sky filled with 2 moons, the sisters gathered in the sacred flame hall. This was the place where royal marriages were announced. Terran arrived, wearing traditional Selkiran robes, dark purple with silver edges. His hair was tied back, and his face was calm. But his heart beat fast. Valeri stepped forward. "We are not 3 anymore." Nisha added, "We are 1 heart now." Taraka completed, "And that heart chooses you." Terran stepped closer and placed both hands on the oath crystal. It glowed blue, then silver, then brilliant white. Gasps filled the room. Even the king stood in awe. No outsider had ever been accepted by the crystal. Terran looked at the sisters. "Then I make my vow. I will not just marry you. I will protect your people, your future, your hopes, even if I die doing it." Valeri touched his chest. "We don't want your death." Nisha smiled sadly. "Only your heart." Taraka whispered, "And your life. With us." They held hands beneath the silver flame. The ceremony had no priest, no crowd, no rules, only 4 hearts making a promise beneath the stars. But just as the flame rose high, a guard burst through the door. "Forgive me, Your Highness. We've spotted something on the edge of the starfields." The king stood quickly. "What did you see?" The guard's face was pale. A ship. No ID. No signal. Black as the void. Terran froze. The sisters turned toward him. He whispered 2 words. "They're here." All over Selkara, alarms began to ring. Ships rose from the surface. Defense shields glowed in the sky. Civilians were moved underground. The Royal War Council met within minutes. The king looked at Terran. "Is this the enemy you warned us about?" "Yes," Terran said. "But that's not a scout ship. That's a harvester. It consumes cities." "How do we stop it?" one general asked. Terran shook his head. "You don't stop it. You survive it." The king looked at his daughters. "Then we will fight. And we will survive." But Valeri stepped forward. "No, father. Let us speak first." Nisha added, "We have something they don't expect." Taraka pointed to Terran. "Him." A few hours later, a small message pod was launched toward the black ship. Inside it was a single recording. Terran's voice. "I am Terran of Earth. I know what you are. I've seen your kind before. You feed on fear, but this world will not give it to you." There was silence for an hour. Then the black ship responded. The voice was deep, inhuman. "The Lightbringer speaks. Good. It will make your burning more beautiful." Suddenly, hundreds of pods launched from the black ship, headed straight for the palace. The battle had begun. Sky fighters rose. Shields locked. Energy beams lit up the dark sky. Terran ran into the command tower. "Don't fight them directly. Their armor adapts." He typed fast, connecting the Selkaran defenses to Earth's war database, still stored in the device he had given the king. "We'll target their communication nodes. Cut the head. The body falls." Valeri commanded the air fleet. Nisha took over ground troops. Taraka led a stealth unit through the underground tunnels. It wasn't just war. It was their war now. In the middle of the chaos, the central tower was hit. Terran was thrown across the room, blood on his face, his arm broken. The screen crackled. The shadowy enemy leader appeared. "You should have died on your own world," the voice hissed. Terran laughed weakly. "You should have brought more ships." He tapped one final command. Boom. A feedback wave erupted from the palace defenses, destroying all the enemy pods at once, the perfect counterstrike from Earth's war archives. The skies went silent. The enemy ship began to pull back. But the cost was great. The palace walls were burning. And Terran wasn't moving. The sisters found him minutes later. He lay in the rubble, blood on his lips, breathing faint. "No," Taraka said, falling to her knees. "Not now." Valeri shook him. "Stay awake. You promised us a future." Nisha cried. "We chose you. We love you." Terran opened his eyes slowly. "I love you too," he whispered. "Always." Then he closed his eyes again. The marriage of honor. Smoke still floated in the air. The battle was over, but the palace of Selkara looked like a broken jewel, cracked, scorched, and quiet. Inside the royal healing chamber, Terran lay unmoving. Valeri sat by his side, her silver eyes full of pain. Nisha held his hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. Taraka stood near the doorway, silent, her face frozen, but her heart breaking. He had saved their world, but they feared it cost him his life. The king stood at the foot of the bed, head bowed. "If he dies, Selkara will lose more than a hero." A whisper came from behind. "No, not today." It was the royal healer, holding a strange glowing crystal. "This was found in the wreckage. It's part of the device Terran gave you." The king blinked. "What does it do?" "It holds his life imprint," the healer replied. "If used quickly, it can bring him back." "Then use it," Valeri shouted. The healer nodded. The crystal was placed on Terran's chest. It glowed softly, then brighter, then blindingly. Everyone leaned in. Terran gasped. His chest rose. His eyes fluttered open. The sisters cried together. Valeri kissed his forehead. You fool, you came back. Terran blinked. Did we? When? Nisha laughed through her tears. Yes, thanks to you. Taraka leaned in close. We thought we lost you. Terran smiled weakly. You can't get rid of me that easily. Later that day, Terran stood with the sisters before the throne once more. This time, he wasn't a guest. This time, he wasn't mocked. He stood as a hero, a savior, and a future king. The nobles all bowed. The king stepped forward, holding a silver crown and a deep purple robe. Terran of Earth, he said in a firm voice that echoed across the hall, you have done what no one else ever could. You gave peace to those who had never known it. You gave love to those who have forgotten it. He turned to the people. I declare this human no longer a foreigner. From this day, he is a son of Selkara. Terran bowed deeply. It is I who am honored. Then the king looked to his daughters. You once mocked him. Then you served him. And now you've chosen him. Valeri stepped forward, not because of law. Nisha said, not because of duty. Taraka smiled, but because our hearts never had a choice. The king raised his arms. Then let the marriage of honor begin. The whole city celebrated. Drums thundered. Lights filled the sky. Floating ships painted bright trails across the stars. Terran stood beneath the star arch, a sacred Selkaran structure that only appeared during rare events. He wore royal robes now, but still kept a small earth charm around his neck, a reminder of where he came from. The three sisters stood before him, dressed in glowing robes of silver, blue, and green. Each represented their essence. Valeri's pride, Nisha's fire, Taraka's strength. The High Flamekeeper began the ceremony. Selkara honors bonds not through words, but through unity. He looked to Terran. Do you, human, accept these daughters of Selkara as your partners in peace, love, and war? Terran nodded. With all that I am. He turned to them. And do you, daughters of Selkara, accept this human as your chosen, not just for now, but for whatever is to come? Together, the sisters spoke. In light, in darkness, in peace, and in war, we choose you. The crystal flame between them turned pure white. The bond was complete. The crowd roared in celebration. But high above the city, in a private watchtower, the king stood silently with his most trusted general. You see it now, the king said. The old stories were true. What stories? The general asked. The king looked to the stars. That a human would come, and that his heart would unite what war could not. Across the galaxy, the story of the human and the three alien sisters spread like wildfire. Some refused to believe it. Others feared it. But many hoped. For if a human and aliens, so different in blood and bone, could choose love over hate, maybe the rest of the galaxy could too. Weeks passed. Terran now worked as an ambassador, meeting with species who had once feared humans. With Valeri's sharp diplomacy, Nisha's fierce confidence, and Taraka's honest strength, they traveled together, always united. Some worlds opened their arms. Others sent warnings. But nothing shook their bond. One quiet evening, Terran sat with the sisters on a hill above the glowing city. The stars twinkled above. I never thought I'd find family so far from Earth, he said. Valeri leaned on his shoulder. You didn't find it. Nisha smirked. You built it. Taraka whispered, and now we'll protect it. Together. Terran smiled, holding all their hands. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a visitor in this galaxy. He felt like home. The message across the stars. Back on Earth, in a small observatory, a young girl looked up at the stars. Her screen blinked, an incoming signal. She opened it. A message played. To Earth, this is Terran. I've found peace. I've found love. I found a future worth fighting for. And I hope, one day, "You will too," she gasped. Tears filled her eyes, because now she knew the stories were true.